After a terrible car accident, I called my husband and asked him to pick me up from the ER. He texted back, "I'm at lunch with my female best friend, can't just leave." I replied, "Okay." What the police officer said when they approached his table at the restaurant made him wish he hadn't left me waiting. The text message arrived while I was still bleeding. "Can't leave lunch with Charlotte right now. Her ex is stalking her. Call an Uber?" "Sorry, babe." I stared at my husband's words through the spiderweb screen of my phone, my dislocated shoulder screaming with every shallow breath, and typed back with my one good hand, "Okay." That single word would end our 8-year marriage, though Tyler didn't know it yet. He was too busy comforting Charlotte Thomas over her latest manufactured crisis to realize his wife was lying in Riverside General's emergency room, choosing between rage and morphine. The nurses had asked me 3 times if they could call someone else. Anyone else. But I kept staring at that message, reading it over and over like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My husband of 8 years had just suggested I take an Uber home from the emergency room after a car accident that could have killed me. Because Charlotte Thomas, his college friend with the trust fund and the endless romantic disasters, needed him more. This morning felt like a different lifetime now. I'd stood in our kitchen at 6:30 a.m., making Tyler's breakfast exactly how he liked it. 2 eggs over easy, 3 strips of bacon crispy enough to shatter, wheat toast with just a whisper of butter. 8 years of making the same breakfast and I could do it without thinking. My hands knew the motions while my mind wandered to the pharmacy conference dinner that night, where I'd receive my 5-year service award. Tyler had promised to be there. Or rather, he'd said he'd try. "Charlotte's having another crisis," he'd announced over breakfast, his eyes never leaving his phone screen. The soft smile playing at his lips was the one I used to see when I'd walk into a room. Now it belonged to her text messages. Another one? I'd kept my voice neutral while cracking eggs with perhaps more force than necessary. "That's the 3rd crisis this month. Her ex is stalking her. She's scared, Hannah." Marcus, the ex-boyfriend, had been stalking Charlotte for 6 months according to her. Strange how the stalking only seemed to occur on Thursday afternoons when Tyler had his longest lunch break. Strange how it never quite escalated to actually calling the police. I'd wanted to point out these inconsistencies, but I'd learned that defending Charlotte was Tyler's new religion. Instead, I'd reminded him about the pharmacy dinner. His response was predictable. "I'll try to make it, but if Charlotte needs me..." She would need him. She always did on Thursdays. The thing about Thursday lunches was that they'd started so innocently I couldn't even be properly angry at first. 6 months ago, Tyler had brought Charlotte into my pharmacy at Riverside General. She needed anxiety medication and Tyler wanted to make sure she got the right treatment. I'd watched from behind the counter as she touched his arm while laughing at something he said. The gesture was casual, intimate, familiar. Tyler had straightened his tie when she complimented it, a peacock preening for attention. "Charlotte's going through a rough divorce," he'd explained that night. "She doesn't have anyone else in town she can really talk to." 1 lunch became 2. Monthly became weekly. 1 hour stretched to 3. Always on Thursdays when I worked my late shift and wouldn't be home until after 9. I tried talking to him about it last month. We were lying in bed and I could smell her perfume on his shirt. Something expensive and floral that made our bedroom smell like a department store. "Do you think Charlotte might be taking advantage of your kindness?" I'd asked carefully. Tyler had turned to look at me with such genuine surprise that for a moment, I wondered if I was wrong. "Taking advantage? Hannah, she's falling apart. Her ex is psychologically abusing her. He has panic attacks. She needs support. She has parents 20 minutes away. He has a therapist. She has other friends. But she trusts me," Tyler had said, as if that explained everything. As if her trust was more important than our marriage. Eleanor Wilson, Tyler's mother, had cornered me at our wedding reception 8 years ago. She'd had too much champagne, and her words came with the sharp edges of truth that alcohol tends to reveal. "You're good for him," she'd said, not as a compliment but as an assessment. "Tyler needs someone practical. Someone who won't let him drift. You'll keep him grounded." I'd thought she was welcoming me to the family. Now I understood she'd been hiring me for a position. Tyler's keeper. The practical one who worked 12-hour shifts while he played at his father's accounting firm, taking 3-hour lunches without consequence. The morning of the accident, I'd watched Tyler get ready for work with the attention of someone memorizing details. He wore the burgundy tie Charlotte had complimented last week, the one I'd given him 2 Christmases ago that had lived in his closet until she'd mentioned how it brought out his eyes. His cologne was stronger than usual. He trimmed his beard with unusual precision. "Big meeting today?" I'd asked. "Just Thursday," he'd replied, and we both knew what that meant. I'd left for my shift at the hospital thinking about when we'd stopped really seeing each other. When did I become furniture in my own marriage? When did his phone become more interesting than conversations with his wife? The questions followed me through my morning routine at the pharmacy, through the lunch break I ate alone in the break room, through the afternoon that would end with my car crumpled against a concrete barrier and my shoulder forced from its socket. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent the morning filling prescriptions for Charlotte's anxiety medication. The same medication she'd needed for 6 months of Thursday crises that never seemed to resolve. The same medication that gave her a reason to text my husband at all hours with questions about side effects and dosage adjustments. Now, lying in the emergency room with monitors beeping around me, I thought about all the Thursday nights I'd come home to find Tyler already in bed, pretending to be asleep. The credit card charges at the Sterling room that were always just a little too high for a lunch between friends. The way he'd started keeping his phone face down during dinner. Officer Morrison appeared at my bedside again, her expression carefully professional. "Mrs. Wilson, we've tried calling your husband 3 more times. The calls are going straight to voicemail now." He turned off his phone rather than be interrupted during his lunch with Charlotte. The recognition of that fact settled over me like a blanket made of lead. Tyler had actively chosen to be unreachable while his wife lay in the emergency room. "Officer Morrison," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the medication making everything feel distant and foggy. "I know exactly where my husband is. The Sterling room on 5th Street. He's at his usual table by the window with Charlotte Thomas." I paused, tasting blood from where I'd bitten my lip. "Would you mind delivering the message in person? I'm worried he doesn't understand how serious this was." Officer Morrison studied my face for a moment, and I saw understanding dawn in her expression. "We can certainly do that, Mrs. Wilson. The Sterling room, you said?" "Every Thursday," I confirmed. "Like clockwork." The pharmacy clock showed 6:47 p.m. when Margaret, my supervisor, caught me at the door with my coat already half on. Her expression carried that particular blend of desperation and authority that meant she was about to ask for something I wouldn't want to give. "Hannah, I hate to ask, but the controlled substances inventory is off by 3 counts. State's coming Monday for inspection. I really need someone who knows what they're doing to help me sort this out tonight." My hand paused on the door handle. 3 counts off meant at least 2 hours of checking every log, every signature, every transfer. The conference dinner started at 7:30, my award presentation at 8. Tyler had already made it clear that Charlotte's crisis took priority, but maybe if I showed up late with the actual award in hand, it would mean something. Maybe he'd look up from his phone and remember who he married. "I'm sorry, Margaret. Tonight's the conference dinner. Remember? The 5-year recognition." Margaret's face shifted to understanding, then something else. Pity maybe. She knew about Tyler's Thursday lunches like everyone at the hospital knew. Gossip traveled through medical facilities faster than any virus. "Of course. Go get your award, honey. You've earned it." The rain had started during my shift, a gentle patter against the hospital windows that had turned into a proper downpour by the time I reached my car. The wipers squealed against the windshield, rubber aged beyond usefulness but never quite bad enough to replace. Another thing on the list of things Tyler said we'd handle together but never did. I pulled out of the hospital parking garage into streets already flooding at the corners. The conference dinner was downtown at the Marriott, 15 minutes in good weather, probably 30 in this mess. My phone sat in the cup holder and I kept glancing at it, waiting for Tyler to text that he was on his way, that Charlotte's crisis had resolved, that he remembered his wife was being honored tonight. Nothing. The rain hammered harder as I turned onto Madison Avenue. The street lights created halos in the water streaming down my windshield, and I had to lean forward to see properly. The radio played something old and melancholy, a song my mother used to hum while doing dishes. I thought about calling Tyler one more time, but what would be the point? He'd made his choice clear at breakfast. Charlotte needed him. Charlotte always needed him on Thursdays. I was thinking about what I'd say if anyone asked where Tyler was tonight when I approached the intersection at 5th and Madison. The light was green, had been green for several seconds as I coasted toward it at 25 miles per hour, cautious in the rain. I was already entering the intersection when movement caught my peripheral vision. A lifted pickup truck, one of those unnecessarily huge things college boys drive to feel important, barreling down 5th Street like the rain didn't exist. The last coherent thought I had was that he wasn't stopping. This kid in his massive truck, probably 19 or 20, wearing a backwards baseball cap, was going to run that red light at full speed. The impact folded my car door into my ribs. The sound was extraordinary, nothing like movies make it seem. It was wet and sharp and final, metal surrendering to metal in the rain. My body moved in directions it wasn't meant to move, and suddenly the steering wheel was somewhere near my right ear and the door was touching my left hip in a way that made geometry stop making sense. Time did something strange then. Everything slowed down and sped up simultaneously. I could see individual raindrops on what was left of my windshield, each one perfect and separate. My mother's voice floated through my head with absolute clarity, a memory from 20 years ago when she'd caught me leaving the house in ratty underwear. Always wear clean underwear, Hannah. What if you're in an accident? What will the paramedics think? The absurdity of that thought made me want to laugh, but my chest wouldn't expand properly. Something warm was running into my eyes, and when I tried to wipe it away, my left arm wouldn't respond to commands. It just hung there at an angle that made my stomach lurch. My wedding ring caught the streetlight through the shattered window, gold covered in red that I knew was blood but couldn't quite process as mine. 8 years wearing that ring. 8 years of believing it meant something more than jewelry. Now it was just metal on a finger attached to an arm that wouldn't move, covered in blood from a head wound I couldn't see but could definitely feel. The radio was still playing. Through the chaos of steam from the destroyed engine and rain pouring through where windows used to be, that melancholy song continued like nothing had happened. My brain, probably in shock, decided this was vitally important information. The song was "The Night We Met" by Lord Huron. I could identify it despite everything else shutting down. Some part of me found this hilarious. Voices started penetrating the bubble of shock. Male Young panicked. The kid from the truck sang variations of "I didn't see her," and "The light was yellow," and "Is she okay?" over and over like a broken record. Other voices joined, calmer ones giving instructions about not moving me, about calling 911, about checking for breathing. Then familiar voices. Professional ones. The paramedics arrived faster than seemed possible, though time had become negotiable, so maybe it had been hours. I recognized the controlled urgency in their movements, the way they communicated in short, efficient sentences. They were doing the initial assessment, checking airways, breathing, circulation. The basic stuff you learn first day of any medical training. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Don't try to move. We're going to help you." The young paramedic leaning over me couldn't have been older than 25. Her partner looked even younger. I wanted to tell them I knew what they were doing, that I understood the medical terminology, that I worked at Riverside General. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was dislocated shoulder, possible concussion, multiple lacerations to the forehead and scalp. They exchanged glances over my head, the look medical professionals share when a patient might have head trauma but is speaking too clearly to dismiss. "Are you a medical professional?" the older one asked while establishing for access with practiced ease. "Pharmacy. Riverside General. Was supposed to be at dinner. 5-year award." The words came out disconnected, like beads from a broken necklace scattering across pavement. They worked around me with choreographed efficiency. Cervical collar to protect my spine. Careful examination of the shoulder that made me see stars despite whatever they'd pushed through the fore. Pressure on the head wound that was apparently more impressive than I'd realized based on how quickly they moved after seeing it. "We're going to extract you now. This might hurt." Might hurt was medical professional speak for, "This is going to be agony." They cut away what was left of my door with tools that sounded like angry metal wasps. Every movement sent fire through my shoulder and ribs. I focused on their faces, on the rain hitting their uniforms, on anything except the pain that made breathing feel like drowning in reverse. That's when Officer Janet Morrison appeared at the ambulance doors as they loaded me in. I knew her face immediately despite the fog of shock and medication. She picked up her mother's blood pressure medication every month, always chatty, always asking about my family, my husband, my life. "Hannah. Oh honey, it's Janet Morrison. You're going to be okay. We need to contact someone for you. Who should we call? The automatic response came without thought, programmed by 8 years of marriage. Tyler Wilson. My husband. I gave her the number while part of my brain screamed that he wouldn't answer, that Charlotte's stalker crisis would be more important than his wife's actual emergency, that Thursday lunches were sacred while Thursday accidents were inconvenient. The ambulance doors closed with a definitive thud that seemed to seal me into a different world entirely. The ride to Riverside General took 12 minutes according to the digital clock above my head, though time had become elastic and unreliable since the moment that pickup truck had rearranged my evening plans along with my skeletal structure. The emergency room ceiling tiles came into focus slowly as they transferred me from the ambulance gurney to a hospital bed. Someone had tried to make them cheerful once, painting tiny clouds in some of the squares, but years of fluorescent light exposure had yellowed them into something that looked more like old teeth than sky. I counted them while Dr. Webb manipulated my shoulder, his hands professional and surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he'd been awake for 36 hours straight. This is going to hurt, he warned, which was doctor speak for prepare yourself for agony. On 3. 1, 2. He pulled on 2. The grinding pop of my shoulder sliding back into place sent white lightning through my entire left side. Stars exploded across my vision, and for a moment I was somewhere else entirely, remembering Tyler last month when I'd asked him to open a jar of pickles. You're stronger than you pretend to be, Hannah, he'd said with that particular tone of mild annoyance he'd perfected over 8 years. You don't need me for everything. The irony of that memory hit harder than the pain medication they were pushing through my fore. Here I was with a legitimately dislocated shoulder, not pretending anything, and Tyler was nowhere to be found. I wondered if he'd believe this was real or if he'd think I was being dramatic about this too, the way he claimed I was dramatic about Charlotte monopolizing his time. There we go, Dr. Webb said, satisfaction evident as he tested the joint's mobility. Clean reduction. You'll be sore for a few weeks but no permanent damage. Nurse Patricia appeared at my bedside as Dr. Webb moved on to his next patient. Patricia had been working emergency for 20 years, and it showed in the careful way she held herself, like she'd learned to carry other people's traumas without letting them seep into her bones. Her expression held that particular combination of sympathy and professionalism that suggested she had news I wouldn't want to hear. Honey, we've been trying to reach your husband. The contact number you gave Officer Morrison. She held up the department phone, showing the call log. 3 attempts, straight to voicemail each time. 3 calls. 3 times the hospital had tried to inform Tyler his wife was in the emergency room. I knew exactly where he was, could picture him at the Sterling room with his phone face down on the white tablecloth, giving Charlotte his complete attention while she detailed whatever fictional crisis justified his absence. But knowing and accepting were different things entirely. Let me try, I said, reaching for my phone with my good hand. The screen was a spider web of cracks from the accident, but it still worked. My fingers shook as I typed, though I couldn't tell if it was from the medication or from the fear that I already knew how this would play out. Had an accident. I'm at Riverside General ER. Dislocated shoulder, concussion. Can you come get me? The message showed delivered immediately. Then those 3 dots appeared and my heart did something stupid and hopeful in my chest. He was typing. He'd seen it. Maybe the calls hadn't gone through properly. Maybe he'd been in a meeting. Maybe there was still a reasonable explanation that didn't involve him choosing Charlotte over his injured wife. The dots disappeared and reappeared several times, like he was writing and deleting, trying to find the right words. Each time they vanished, my hope dimmed a little more, until finally his response arrived with the gentle vibration that had once made me smile when I saw his name on my screen. Can't leave lunch with Charlotte right now, her ex is stalking her. Call an Uber? Sorry babe. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. The concussion must be affecting my reading comprehension. Surely my husband of 8 years hadn't just suggested I take an Uber home from the emergency room. Surely he hadn't prioritized Charlotte's recurring Thursday drama over his wife's actual medical emergency. But there it was in black and white, or rather in the blue and gray of our text conversation. 23 words that managed to capture everything wrong with our marriage in a single message. The casual dismissal. The prioritization of someone else's manufactured crisis. The suggestion that I handle my own emergency transportation like I'd gotten a flat tire instead of nearly died. Something broke inside my chest as I stared at that message. Not my heart exactly, though that was certainly involved. It was bigger than that, more structural. The framework that had held my life together for 8 years. The basic belief that when it really mattered, when the chips were down and everything was falling apart, Tyler would choose me. Would choose us. Would remember the vows he'd made in front of our families and friends. Patricia was still standing there, watching my face change as I processed my husband's response. She'd probably seen this exact scenario play out hundreds of times in different variations. The spouse who couldn't be bothered. The partner who had somewhere more important to be. The emergency contact who wasn't interested in the emergency. "Is someone else coming to get you, honey?" she asked gently. I looked at my phone again, at Tyler's message sitting there like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was building. Then I looked at Patricia, at her kind face that had seen too much disappointment to be surprised by any of it anymore. "No," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Decided. But I need to make another call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Officer Morrison's number, still saved from when she'd given it to me months ago during the pharmacy break-ins. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with concern. "Hannah, how are you doing, honey? I've been worried." "I'm stable, thank you. Janet, I have an unusual request." My voice remained steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "My husband isn't answering his phone, but I know exactly where he is. The Sterling Room on 5th Street. He's at his usual table by the window with Charlotte Thomas." There was a pause on the other end, and I could feel Janet processing what I was really asking. Would it be possible for someone to notify him in person? I continued, each word deliberate and clear. "I'm just worried he doesn't understand how serious this was." Another pause, longer this time. When Janet spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, carrying an understanding that made me want to cry for the first time since the accident. "We can certainly do that, Hannah. The Sterling Room, you said? We'll send officers right over." "Thank you. He'll be at the table by the window. The one with the view of the city. With Charlotte Thomas. They have it every Thursday." "Every Thursday," Janet repeated, and those two words carried more weight than they should have. After I hung up, I lay back against the hospital pillow and closed my eyes, picturing what was about to happen. The Sterling Room with its crystal glasses and carefully folded napkins. Tyler leaning forward to catch every word of Charlotte's latest crisis. Her hand probably on his arm, that casual touch that meant everything and nothing. Then the door would open. Officers would walk in, their uniforms dark and official against all that white tablecloth elegance. Conversations would stop. Forks would pause midway to mouths. And everyone in that restaurant would turn to watch as the police approached Tyler's table. Charlotte's perfectly manicured hand would fly to her mouth. Tyler's face would cycle through confusion, annoyance, and then finally understanding. The silence would be complete as Officer Morrison explained that his wife had been in a serious accident, that she was in the emergency room, that they'd been trying to reach him for hours. The emergency room had developed its own rhythm around me while I waited for whatever came next. The steady beeping of monitors, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on polished floors, the distant murmur of other people's crises being managed with professional efficiency. I had closed my eyes, not sleeping but floating in that medicated space between consciousness and dreams, when my phone buzzed against the hospital blanket. 3 texts arrived in rapid succession, Tyler's name lighting up my cracked screen like a warning signal. "Hannah, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was that serious. Why didn't the hospital call more than once? Sending police was completely unnecessary and vindictive." I stared at the messages, watching them blur and refocus as my concussion made reading an adventure in patience. The progression was almost fascinating in its predictability. Apology, deflection, accusation. The Tyler Wilson playbook for avoiding responsibility, delivered in real time while I lay in a hospital bed with 15 stitches decorating my forehead. Another buzz. "You're being dramatic about this." For messages. For different attempts to make this my fault. The accident was serious enough to warrant an apology but not serious enough to leave lunch. The hospital should have tried harder to reach him, as if 3 calls to voicemail weren't sufficient. Sending police was vindictive, not a necessary response to his deliberate unavailability. And finally, the crown jewel of his deflection strategy. I was being dramatic. My good hand trembled as I set the phone aside without responding. What was there to say? That a dislocated shoulder and head trauma weren't dramatic enough for his attention? That his wife bleeding in an emergency room should have waited patiently for Charlotte's crisis to resolve? The curtain around my bed rustled and David walked in looking like he'd driven through hell to get here. My younger brother still wore his real estate showing clothes, the crisp blue shirt and khakis that made him look trustworthy to potential buyers, though now they were wrinkled and rain-spotted. His face, usually set in an easy smile that sold houses and charmed clients, was carved from stone. 2 hours, he said, crossing to my bedside in 3 quick strides. 2 hours I've been driving, thinking about all the ways I was going to support you through recovery, worried sick about my sister. His hand found mine, gentle despite the anger radiating from him. Then I get here and the nurse tells me your husband suggested you take an Uber home. David. No, Hannah. Just no. He pulled the visitor's chair close with his free hand, sitting down without letting go of mine. Show me the messages. I handed him my phone, watching his face transform as he read Tyler's texts. The progression was almost theatrical. Disbelief, anger, then something colder and more calculated that I recognized from his business dealings. This was David in acquisition mode, except instead of property he was calculating the complete removal of Tyler from my life. 8 years, he muttered, still scrolling through the messages. 8 years I've watched him treat you like staff instead of a wife. But this is next-level selfishness. He pulled out his own phone, fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. I'm calling Martinez, the locksmith. He owes me a favor. Can have your locks changed by tomorrow morning. David, I don't know if. And Morrison Moving Company. They specialize in quick extractions. Divorce situations, domestic problems, that sort of thing. Very discreet, very professional. The speed of it made my head spin more than the concussion. It's been 8 years, David. I can't just what? Demand basic human decency from your husband? Expect him to show up when you're in the hospital? His voice softened slightly, but his fingers never stopped typing. Hannah, he chose lunch with another woman over your medical emergency. There's no coming back from that. My phone buzzed again. Not Tyler this time, but an Instagram notification. Charlotte Thomas had sent me a message. I almost didn't open it, too exhausted to deal with whatever drama she wanted to share, but curiosity won. The message was longer than expected, and reading it felt like watching the final piece of Tyler's carefully constructed image crumble into dust. Hannah, I'm mortified by what happened today. When the police arrived at our lunch, I was shocked Tyler hadn't left immediately after your text. I asked him why he didn't go to you right away. I had to pause, my vision swimming slightly before continuing. He said you were always exaggerating things for attention, that you were probably fine and just trying to manipulate him into leaving. Even after the officers explained about the accident, he kept insisting you were being dramatic. I've never been so disgusted with someone in my life. David was reading over my shoulder now, his expression darkening with each word. I had no idea you were actually hurt. He made it sound like you had a tender bender and were making it into something bigger. I'm so sorry for unknowingly participating in this. Tyler is no longer welcome in my life. I hope you recover quickly and find the support you deserve. The message sat there like evidence in a trial I hadn't realized was happening. Tyler had not only dismissed my accident to me but had actively portrayed me as manipulative and attention-seeking to Charlotte. Even when uniformed officers explained I was in the emergency room with significant injuries, he'd maintained the fiction that I was being dramatic. Send me that screenshot, David said quietly. Martinez can be there at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Morrison Moving by noon. How do you feel about a formal notice drafted by my lawyer friend, delivered by certified mail? I looked at my brother, this man who'd driven 2 hours without hesitation when I needed him, who was now architecting the dissolution of my marriage with the same precision he used to close real estate deals. He hadn't once said I told you so, though he'd warned me about Tyler years ago, gently at first, then more insistently as the patterns became obvious. He'll say I'm overreacting, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Let him. While he's saying it, his belongings will be in boxes and the locks will be changed. David squeezed my hand gently. Hannah, he showed you exactly who he is today. When you needed him most, he chose someone else. That's not a husband. That's just some guy you happen to live with. I thought about Tyler at the Sterling Room, How his Thursday routine had been more important than his wife's emergency. How he'd characterized me to Charlotte, painting me as hysterical and manipulative to justify his absence. How even now, after police notification and public humiliation, he was still trying to make this my fault. "Call Martinez," I said, my voice steady despite everything. "8 a.m. tomorrow." David nodded, already pulling up the contact. "And Morrison moving?" "Yoon. Everything of his, packed and ready." My brother smiled for the first time since walking in, though it wasn't a happy expression. It was the smile of someone watching justice finally arrive, even if it came dressed in heartbreak and hospital gowns. "I'll handle everything," he said, and I knew he would. While Tyler was probably still at the Sterling Room, trying to salvage his dignity in front of Charlotte and the restaurant patrons who'd witnessed his public shaming, David was already dismantling the life we'd built together with surgical precision. My phone buzzed once more. "Tyler again, we need to talk about this like adults." I looked at the message, then at David, then at my wedding ring still covered in dried blood from the accident. 8 years reduced to this moment, this hospital bed, this decision that wasn't really a decision at all. Tyler had made the choice for both of us when he typed those 23 words suggesting I take an Uber home. David handed me a cup of coffee at 7:45 Friday morning, 15 minutes before Martinez was scheduled to arrive. My shoulder throbbed despite the pain medication, and moving from the bedroom to the couch had taken longer than it should have, but I needed to be present for this. 8 years of marriage couldn't be dismantled from bed. "You sure you want to watch this?" David asked, though he was already arranging pillows to support my injured shoulder. "I need to see it happen. Otherwise, I might convince myself it was all a dream." The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock. Martinez stood there with a toolbox that looked like it had seen 1,000 relationship endings, his weathered face carrying the expression of someone who'd learned not to ask questions about why locks needed changing on a Friday morning. "David Wilson's sister?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I'll have you secured in about an hour. New deadbolts, new door handles, even gonna change out that back door lock you probably forgot existed." He worked with methodical precision, the sound of drilling and metal on metal filling the townhouse. Halfway through installing the second deadbolt, he paused to take a water break. "You know, I see this situation more than you'd think," he said, wiping his forehead. "Husband forgets wife exists until the locks change. Then suddenly they remember they're married." Morrison moving arrived at 9:30, earlier than expected. 3 people in matching blue shirts who moved through the house with the kind of efficiency that came from practice. The team leader, a woman named Rosa who couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall but carried herself like she could bench press a refrigerator, handed me an inventory sheet. "We'll photograph everything before packing, document any existing damage, treat every item with care regardless of whose it is. Professional and neutral, that's our policy." They started in the bedroom. I could hear them working while I sat on the couch, David beside me with his laptop, drafting emails and making phone calls with quiet efficiency. The sound of tape being pulled from rolls, the soft thud of items being placed in boxes, the occasional question about whether something was mine or his. "The Rolex," Rosa called out. "His anniversary gift from 3 years ago. I'd saved for 6 months to buy that watch, working extra shifts during flu season. Tyler had worn it twice. Golf clubs. His. Those had cost more than I'd spent on car maintenance in 2 years. Justified as networking equipment for client relationships that never materialized. The signed baseball in the display case? His. A gift from his father, supposedly valuable, definitely never touched. Each item they packed felt like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I'd been building. The expensive things I'd bought him, trying to make him happy, trying to be the wife he wanted. The hobbies he'd started and abandoned, leaving expensive equipment to gather dust. The designer clothes that had to be dry cleaned, suits that cost more than my monthly student loan payment. Mrs. Chin appeared at the door around 10:30, carrying a container of soup that smelled like comfort and motherhood. She was 73, had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, and had opinions about everyone that she usually kept to herself. "I saw the locksmith," she said, setting the soup on my coffee table. "About time if you ask me. Mrs. Chin. That man never deserved you. Working all hours while he..." She paused, suddenly very interested in adjusting the lid on the soup container. "While he what?" Her face creased with discomfort. "I don't want to upset you more, dear. You've been through enough. Please. Whatever it is, I need to know. She sighed, settling into the chair across from me with the careful movements of someone whose joints protested most activities. That woman, the one with the white BMW? She's been coming by on Tuesday afternoons sometimes. When you're at work. Stays for an hour or two. Charlotte drove a white BMW. Tuesday afternoons I always worked late, preparing for the Wednesday morning inventory. The information clicked into place like a combination lock finding its numbers. How long? Maybe 3 months. I didn't want to say anything without being sure, and then I wasn't sure how to bring it up, and... It's okay, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for telling me. She reached over and patted my good hand. I brought divorce soup. My mother's recipe. Fed it to myself 40 years ago when I left Mr. Chen. Best decision I ever made. After she left, I sat with this new information, adding it to the growing pile of evidence that my marriage had been over long before yesterday's accident. Charlotte hadn't just been having lunch with Tyler. She'd been coming to our home. To our bed probably while I filled prescriptions and counted pills and worked extra shifts to pay for his expensive tastes. Hannah. Rosa stood in the hallway with a question on her face. The home office. There's a lot of paperwork. How do you want us to handle it? I made myself stand, David's hand on my good arm for support, and walked to what had been Tyler's office. His degrees on the wall, his father's company certifications, photos of him at golf tournaments and business dinners. All of it a carefully constructed image of success that I'd been funding for 8 years. Pack it all. Everything that's his. The wedding photos? I looked at our wedding picture on his desk. Both of us smiling, unaware that I was being hired for a position rather than entering a partnership. Especially those. David's phone rang. His lawyer friend from the sound of the conversation. I could hear him dictating terms, precise legal language that transformed my emotional disaster into paperwork. Termination of cohabitation. 48 hours for retrieval. No direct contact. All communication through designated representative. By noon our townhouse had been transformed. 63 boxes lined the entryway, each one labeled with Tyler's name and a general description of contents. The walls showed pale rectangles where his pictures had hung. The closet looked cavernous with just my clothes. The bathroom counter suddenly had space for my things to spread out instead of being crammed into one corner. This needs your signature, David said, presenting the formal notice his lawyer friend had drafted. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. Tyler's belongings were packed. He had 48 hours to collect them. The locks had been changed. Any attempt at direct contact would be considered harassment. I signed it with my good hand, the pen awkward but manageable. It felt like signing discharge papers for a patient who'd been taking up bed space for far too long, preventing someone who actually needed care from getting help. I'll have this delivered by certified mail, David said. He'll get it today. He'll say I'm overreacting. That I'm being dramatic. Let him say it to the boxes. Rosa approached with her final inventory sheet. 63 boxes total. Everything photographed and documented. We can store them if they're not picked up within the specified time frame. 63 boxes. 8 years of Tyler's presence in my life reduced to a number on a moving company's form. It seemed both too many and not enough to show for nearly a decade of marriage. Thank you, I told Rosa, meaning it. She'd handled his things with more care than he'd shown for my emergency. Honey, this is what we do, she said, her professional mask slipping just slightly. And between you and me, the ones who prioritize lunch dates over hospital visits? They usually end up realizing what they lost about 3 months too late. The doorbell camera alert came at 2:47 Saturday afternoon. David was in the kitchen making sandwiches, insisting I needed to eat something besides Mrs. Chen's divorce soup, when my phone buzzed with the motion detection notification. I almost didn't look, thinking it might be a delivery driver or someone turning around in the driveway. But something made me open the app. Tyler stood on the doorstep looking like someone had removed his batteries. His usually perfect hair stuck up at odd angles, yesterday's work shirt wrinkled and untucked on one side. Behind him, Eleanor Wilson emerged from her black Mercedes wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her mouth set in a line so tight it could have been drawn with a ruler. They're here, I said to David, who immediately abandoned the sandwiches to stand behind me, watching the small screen over my shoulder. Tyler raised his hand toward the doorbell, then let it drop. He turned to look at his mother, who was already approaching with the determined stride of someone handling an unpleasant but necessary task. Through the camera's audio, I could hear their conversation. "Just ring it, Tyler." She changed the locks. "She's not going to answer." Then we use the intercom. "Stand up straight. You look pathetic." Eleanor pressed the doorbell with one manicured finger, the sound echoing through my townhouse like a judge's gavel. I didn't move from the couch. David squeezed my good shoulder gently, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone this time. After 30 seconds, Eleanor pressed the intercom button. Her voice crackled through the speaker with the same tone she'd used at family dinners when asking the housekeeper to clear the plates. "Hannah, this is Eleanor Wilson. We're here to collect Tyler's belongings as specified in your notice. Please confirm the items are ready for removal." Not, "How are you feeling after your accident?" Not, "I'm sorry this happened." Just business, which was honestly more honest than she'd been in 8 years of pretending I was good enough for her son. David reached over and pressed the respond button. "Mrs. Wilson, this is David, Hannah's brother. The boxes are in the entryway. The door will unlock remotely. Please complete the removal within 30 minutes. There was a pause before Eleanor responded, her voice even colder. "Understood." David pressed the remote unlock and I watched through the camera as Tyler pushed open the door he used to walk through without thinking. He stopped just inside the threshold, staring at the wall of boxes like they were written in a foreign language. His mouth moved, but the camera didn't pick up what he said. Eleanor pushed past him, surveying the packed items with the efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. "Start loading," she instructed Tyler, who still hadn't moved. "The sooner we finish this, the better." Tyler picked up the first box, labeled office supplies, and I watched his face change as he registered what was happening. This wasn't a dramatic gesture he could talk his way out of. This was real, final, boxed and labeled with the kind of precision that left no room for negotiation. He carried the box to the Mercedes, walking like someone underwater. Eleanor supervised from the doorway, occasionally directing him to be careful with certain boxes, treating the whole process like a business transaction she needed to oversee but didn't want to soil her hands with. On his third trip, Tyler stopped at a box labeled wedding photos, and stood there for a full minute just staring at the label. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before, like someone had let the air out of him. Eleanor's sharp voice cut through whatever moment he was having. "Tyler, we don't have all day. Charlotte has been calling you repeatedly." Charlotte. Even now, even during this, she was still the priority. Tyler picked up the box and continued his mechanical journey to the car. I found myself studying him through the camera, this man I'd spent 8 years with, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Without his confidence, his carefully maintained image, his certainty that the world would always bend to accommodate him, he looked hollow. Younger somehow, like a child forced to clean up a mess he'd made but didn't understand. "Kitchen items, expensive," Tyler read from one box, hefting it carefully. "The copper pans he'd insisted we needed, though he'd never cooked a single meal. The espresso machine that cost $2,000 and made coffee that tasted identical to our old machine. The mandolin slicer still in its original packaging." Eleanor remained at her post by the door, occasionally checking her phone, probably calculating how this embarrassment would affect her social standing. She'd have to explain to her book club why her daughter-in-law wasn't at family functions anymore. Have to find a new narrative for Tyler's sudden single status that didn't involve him abandoning his injured wife for a lunch date. Box by box, Tyler emptied the entryway. His designer clothes, his exercise equipment he'd used twice, his collection of watches, his golf trophies from company tournaments. Each trip to the car seemed to take something out of him, his steps getting heavier, his face growing more haggard. On what must have been his 15th trip, he stopped at a small box labeled Miscellaneous Personal, and opened it right there in the entryway. I could see him pull out something small. His college class ring, maybe, or the cufflinks his grandfather had left him. He stood there holding whatever it was, his back to the camera, shoulders shaking slightly. "Tyler." Eleanor's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "This is neither the time nor the place for dramatics." Dramatics. The same word he'd used about my accident. It must have been a family favorite, pulled out whenever emotions threatened to make things inconvenient. He closed the box and carried it out, but when he came back for the next load, his eyes were red. Whether from tears or lack of sleep, I couldn't tell, and found I didn't particularly care. The whole process took 22 minutes. 8 years of accumulation, 22 minutes of removal. Tyler made one last sweep of the entryway, checking for anything missed, and for just a moment he looked directly at the doorbell camera. Our eyes met through the digital divide and I saw something I'd never seen before in his face. Understanding. Not regret exactly, not an apology, but a recognition of what he'd thrown away for a Thursday lunch. Eleanor appeared beside him. Is that everything? Yeah, Tyler said, his voice barely audible through the speaker. That's everything. Eleanor reached for the intercom one last time. The items have been collected. Tyler wanted me to. She paused and for the first time her composure cracked slightly. He wanted me to tell you he left his house key on the kitchen counter last week. Last week. Before the accident. He'd already been pulling away, probably planning his exit strategy while I was working extra shifts and making his breakfast. The information should have hurt, but instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. They left without another word, the Mercedes pulling away with 63 boxes of Tyler's life crammed into its trunk and back seat. I watched until the car turned the corner and disappeared, taking with it 8 years of my life I'd never get back but no longer wanted. David helped me stand and together we walked through the townhouse. The bathroom counter looked enormous without Tyler's arsenal of products. The closet seemed to echo with all its empty space. The living room wall showed pale rectangles where his diplomas and awards had hung, like ghosts of achievements that had never been quite as impressive as he'd pretended. I stood in the empty living room for a moment longer, running my good hand along the wall where Tyler's diploma had hung. The paint was slightly brighter there, protected from years of sunlight, a perfect rectangle of what used to be. David was already in the kitchen, finishing those sandwiches he'd abandoned earlier, when my phone buzzed with a text from my coworker Melissa. 2 weeks had passed since the boxes left with Eleanor's Mercedes. 2 weeks of learning to exist in spaces that felt too big, too quiet, too mine. My shoulder was healing, the stitches had come out, and I'd returned to work part-time against David's protests that I needed more rest. You'll never guess who I saw last night, Melissa's text read. Your ex at Murphy's bar downtown, absolutely plastered, telling everyone at the bar that you overreacted to a fender bender. Said Charlotte was having a mental health crisis and needed him more. The bartender finally cut him off when he started crying into his whiskey. I read the message twice, picturing Tyler at Murphy's, a dive bar he would have called beneath him 6 months ago. Now he was there, drunk and desperate, spinning a narrative where he was the victim of his dramatic wife's overreaction. The same man who'd suggested I take an Uber from the emergency room was now crying into cheap whiskey about being misunderstood. He actually said Charlotte was suicidal. Melissa's next text arrived. Like that justified everything. But get this. My cousin Sarah works at Charlotte's firm. She's been posting beach photos from Cabo all week. Some mental health crisis. So Charlotte had fled to Mexico rather than deal with the fallout of Tyler's availability. The woman whose endless crises had demanded his immediate attention every Thursday for months had disappeared the moment she could actually have him. There was something almost poetic about it. I didn't respond to Melissa. What was there to say? That I wasn't surprised? That Tyler discovering what abandonment felt like was justice served cold? Instead, I went back to counting pills and filling prescriptions, the routine movements soothing in their predictability. A month later, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Richard Wilson walked into the pharmacy. Tyler's father looked older than I remembered, his usually perfect suit slightly rumpled, the kind of exhaustion in his eyes that came from disappointment rather than lack of sleep. Hannah, he said, approaching the counter with obvious discomfort. I didn't expect. That is, I usually go to the CVS across town. Your blood pressure medication? I asked, already pulling up his profile in our system. Professional, neutral, like he was any other customer. Yes. The doctor increased the dosage. Stress, you understand. I did understand. The gossip network at Riverside General was efficient and comprehensive. Tyler had been making mistakes at his father's firm. Lost 3 major clients in 2 weeks by missing meetings, submitting error-filled reports, showing up late and disheveled. The golden boy who'd been handed a corner office was tarnishing fast. Tyler's been struggling, Richard said quietly while I prepared his prescription. He calls in sick every Thursday now. Says he can't face that day of the week. And Charlotte, she won't return his calls. Changed her number apparently. Every Thursday. The day that had been sacred for their lunches was now the day Tyler couldn't function. He finally understood what it felt like to be abandoned by someone you thought cared about you, except Charlotte had simply stopped answering, while he'd actively chosen lunch over my emergency. That must be difficult, I said, maintaining the same tone I used with any customer discussing personal problems. Richard studied my face for a moment, perhaps looking for anger or satisfaction. He found neither. I had become very good at professional neutrality in the past month. He's been driving past the accident site, Richard added. The intersection where it happened. His mother thinks he's punishing himself. I handed him the prescription bag. Will that be all today, Mr. Wilson? He nodded, understanding the boundary I'd drawn. As he left, I wondered if Tyler really drove past that intersection, if he pictured the pickup truck crushing my door, if he finally understood that some moments couldn't be undone with apologies or explanations. 2 months after the accident, exactly 2 months to the day, a 3-page email appeared in my inbox before my automatic filter could catch it. Tyler had used a different email address, probably created just for this purpose. The subject line read, "Please read, I finally understand." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was a masterpiece of manipulation dressed as revelation. He claimed stress from work had clouded his judgment. Charlotte had told him she was having suicidal thoughts, though she was currently posting sunset photos from Cabo. His anxiety disorder, never previously mentioned in 8 years, had made him freeze in crisis situations. He'd been in therapy for 2 weeks. He'd driven to the accident site and finally understood the trauma I'd experienced 2 months too late. "I see now how wrong I was," he wrote. "When I stood at that intersection, I imagined you trapped in the car, bleeding, afraid, reaching out to me, and I wasn't there. I was eating overpriced salmon while you were fighting for your life." The salmon detail was oddly specific and somehow made everything worse. He remembered what he'd been eating while I bled. "We could try counseling," the email continued. "I've already found a therapist who specializes in trauma and relationship repair. I know I failed you, but doesn't 8 years deserve a second chance?" 8 years. He was right about the time but wrong about everything else. 8 years didn't deserve anything. 8 years was just time spent, not automatic credit toward forgiveness. I read the email once, then set up an automatic filter for his new address too. Any email containing Tyler or Wilson would go straight to trash. No notification, no temptation to read, just digital silence. David called that afternoon while I was on my lunch break, his voice carrying barely suppressed amusement. "You're not going to believe what happened today. Tyler showed up at your office?" Showed up is understating it. He was waiting in the parking lot at 7 a.m., looking like he'd slept in his car, begging me to talk to you, saying he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. I could picture it perfectly. Tyler, who'd always been so concerned with appearances, now desperate enough to ambush my brother in a parking lot like something from a bad movie. Security had to escort him out? I guessed. After he started shouting about true love and second chances. The whole office watched through the windows. My secretary filmed it, actually. He kept saying, "She's my wife, I love her," over and over, like saying it enough would make it true retroactively. He never said it when it mattered. No, David agreed. He was too busy at lunch to say it when it mattered. The image of Tyler being escorted from David's building while proclaiming his love was both pathetic and oddly satisfying. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because he was finally experiencing consequences. For 8 years his choices had been cushioned by my accommodation. Now he was learning what life felt like without that safety net. "Hannah, you're glowing," Melissa said, holding up a champagne flute filled with grocery store sparkling wine that tasted better than any expensive vintage Tyler had ever insisted we needed. "Seriously, you look 10 years younger." 6 months had transformed more than just my living space. The dinner party sprawled through my townhouse. Colleagues from the pharmacy, 2 neighbors including Mrs. Chin, my book club friends who Tyler had called intellectually pedestrian, and David, of course, manning the kitchen with the confidence of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. I'd served dinner on plates I'd found at 3 different thrift stores last month. None of them matched, but somehow they looked perfect together. A blue one with tiny flowers, a yellow one with geometric patterns, a plain white one with a small chip that gave it character. Tyler would have been mortified. I found them delightful. Tell the story about the guy with the fish. Someone called out and Patricia, my former ER nurse, launched into a tale about a patient who'd arrived with a live goldfish in a bag, insisting it needed medical attention. Everyone laughed, the kind of genuine belly-deep laughter that had been absent from this house for years. No one worried about appearing sophisticated. No one checked their watches. No one mentioned Charlotte or Tyler or Thursday lunches. The next morning, I had my final follow-up with Dr. Webb at Riverside General. He manipulated my shoulder through its full range of motion, nodding with satisfaction at each movement. "Perfect recovery," he announced, then paused, studying the thin silver lines on my forehead where the stitches had been. "The scars are barely visible. Another few months and you probably won't see them at all." "They don't bother me," I said, meaning it. Those scars were proof of survival, evidence of the moment everything changed. Dr. Webb sat back, his expression shifting from professional to personal. I went through something similar 5 years ago. Not a car accident, but a moment when trauma revealed what was already broken. My ex-wife brought divorce papers to the hospital when I was recovering from emergency surgery. That's awful. I thought so at the time. But looking back, that surgery didn't end my marriage. It just exposed what had been dying for years while we both pretended everything was fine. Sometimes it takes a collision, literal or metaphorical, to show us we've been living in wreckage all along. His words stayed with me as I drove home, taking a route I'd been avoiding for 6 months. The intersection of 5th and Madison looked different in daylight, busier, more ordinary than the site of personal catastrophe it had become in my memory. I stopped at the red light, the same light the college kid had run that night, and waited. The intersection was just pavement and painted lines. No evidence of the accident remained, no skid marks or broken glass, nothing to mark it as the place where my life split into before and after. Cars moved through in their usual patterns. People crossed the street absorbed in their phones. Life continued its rhythm, indifferent to the history that had unfolded here. When the light turned green, I didn't move immediately. Instead, I thought about that kid in the lifted pickup, probably 19 or 20, who'd changed everything by running this light. I'd learned from the police report that he'd been sober, just young and stupid and racing to meet friends. His insurance had covered everything. He'd sent a letter through his lawyer apologizing profusely, saying he'd have nightmares about it forever. I'd wanted to write back to tell him that his recklessness had accidentally saved me. That his inability to stop at a red light had forced me to stop accepting less than I deserved. That sometimes destruction was the only way to create space for something better. But how do you thank someone for nearly killing you? How do you explain that their worst moment had become your liberation? The car behind me honked gently, pulling me back to the present. I drove through the intersection feeling lighter somehow, like I'd left something heavy behind on that corner. Thursday afternoon had arrived without fanfare. I'd worked my usual shift, come home to my quiet townhouse, changed into comfortable clothes that Tyler would have called frumpy. No elaborate dinner to prepare. No watching the clock to make sure everything was ready when he walked through the door after his extended lunch. Just me, a cup of tea, and a book I'd bought because the cover was pretty and the summary sounded interesting. The book was a mystery novel, the kind Tyler had dismissed as commercial fiction for people who don't really read. I was thoroughly absorbed in chapter 12 when my phone buzzed. David's name appeared on the screen. "Just checking in. You doing okay?" I looked around my townhouse, at the mismatched plates drying in the rack, at the throw pillows I'd chosen because they were soft instead of stylish, at the walls now decorated with photos that made me smile instead of impressed visitors. The afternoon sun slanted through windows no longer covered by the expensive blinds Tyler had insisted we needed, replaced by simple curtains I'd sewn myself last month. "You know what?" I typed back. For the first time in years, genuinely yes. "Good. Want to grab dinner Sunday? That new Thai place open near you." "Sounds perfect." I set the phone aside and returned to my book, tucking my feet under me on the couch that was now entirely mine to sprawl across. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the street, their laughter carrying through the open window. Mrs. Chen was probably in her garden, humming the Chinese songs she'd taught her grandchildren. Normal neighborhood sounds that had always been there, but I'd been too busy managing Tyler's moods to notice. The Thursday afternoon stretched ahead of me, empty of obligations or anxiety. No wondering when Tyler would come home. No preparing explanations for why dinner was simple or why I was tired or why I hadn't organized his dry cleaning. No checking my phone to see if Charlotte's crisis would extend his absence. Just peace, earned through pain but worth every moment of the journey that brought me here. I thought about Tyler occasionally, the way you think about a movie you once watched but can't quite remember the ending. He existed now in the past tense, a character from a different story, one I'd closed and shelved and had no interest in rereading. The anger had faded months ago, replaced by something that wasn't quite indifference but wasn't forgiveness either. It was simply done, finished, a chapter that ended when that pickup truck rearranged more than just metal and glass. My shoulder barely ached anymore, just occasional stiffness when the weather changed. The scars on my forehead had faded to thin lines that looked like worry marks, evidence of a life lived rather than a trauma survived. Everything had healed, bones, skin, and finally the parts of me I hadn't realized were broken until they started mending. I turned the page of my book, settling deeper into the couch, and smiled at nothing in particular. It was Thursday afternoon, I was alone and I was happy. Genuinely, completely, peacefully happy. The architecture of my new life was simple but solid, built on foundations I'd chosen rather than inherited, decorated with joy rather than obligation. This was what freedom felt like, not dramatic or triumphant, just quiet and true and entirely mine. If this story of poetic justice had you rooting for Hannah's comeback, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the police walked into the Sterling room, exposing Tyler's priorities to everyone. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. After I lost my job, my wealthy husband suddenly said, "From now on we split everything 50-50ths. I'll only care for myself." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just looked at him with calm eyes and said, "All right." He didn't expect what happened after that. "Sign here," Cole said, sliding a document across our marble dining table with the same casual precision he used for multi-million-dollar hedge fund deals. I had my lawyer draw it up this morning. I stared at the paper titled, "Domestic Financial Restructuring Agreement," while my coffee grew cold in my hands. 3 days. I'd been unemployed for exactly 3 days, and my husband of 8 years had already consulted a lawyer about dividing our life into itemized columns. "From now on we split everything 50-50, he continued, uncapping his Mont Blanc pen, the one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. "I'll only care for myself." Before we dive deeper, if you believe marriage should be a partnership, not a business transaction, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps more women find these important stories. Now let's see what Cole's 50-50 arrangement really meant. The morning light streaming through our penthouse windows caught the gold trim of the pen, the same light that used to make our Saturday mornings feel sacred. For 8 years this had been our ritual. Me cooking eggs Benedict from scratch while Cole read the Financial Times, occasionally sharing merger news from his hedge fund world. The hollandaise sauce I'd perfected, the precise temperature of his coffee, the way I'd arrange fresh flowers on the table. All of it had felt like love. Now it felt like unpaid labor he was itemizing. "You had your lawyer draw this up," I repeated slowly, flipping through pages of subsections and clauses. "Without discussing it with me first." "I wanted to have a framework ready," Cole said, adjusting his Princeton class ring, a nervous tell I'd noticed during our first date. "More efficient this way." Efficient. Everything in Cole's world came down to efficiency and optimization. It's what made him brilliant at managing hedge funds and terrible at understanding why I was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. The document was thorough, I'd give him that. Rent division, utility allocations, grocery expenditures, even a formula for calculating shared space usage fees. My husband had turned our marriage into a spreadsheet while I was still processing my layoff from Hartman Capital. Monday morning had started normally enough. I'd kissed Cole goodbye, driven to the office, grabbed my usual vanilla latte from the cart outside the building. By noon, I was sitting in Margaret's corner office while she explained that market conditions required strategic restructuring. We both knew the truth. The new CEO wanted his nephew in a senior position, and I was the casualty of nepotism dressed up as fiscal responsibility. "I need some time with this," Margaret had said, unable to meet my eyes as she pushed the severance package across her desk. "You're brilliant, Jade. This isn't about performance." But performance was all that mattered to Cole, apparently. "When did you decide this?" I asked, setting the contract down carefully, fighting the urge to crumple it into a ball. It's been on my mind for a while, he said, finally looking up from his phone. Your job loss just clarified things. My father always said dependency breeds weakness. His father, William Pemberton, the tech entrepreneur who'd built his fortune on the backs of underpaid programmers and died at his desk at 58, leaving Cole millions and an inability to separate human worth from net worth. I thought about Tuesday evening when I'd finally told Cole about the layoff. He'd been in his home office, 3 monitors glowing with market data. I'd stood in the doorway like a stranger in my own home, watching him track futures prices. I lost my job, I'd said. His fingers had paused on the keyboard for exactly 2 seconds before resuming their clicking. When? Yesterday. They gave me 2 weeks severance. That's when he turned around, his expression unreadable. Don't worry, we'll figure something out. But even as he'd said it, I'd watched him pull up our joint account on his center monitor, calculating how long my final paycheck would last. He'd poured himself a scotch, Macallan 25, a bottle worth more than most people's monthly rent, and excused himself for a quick work call that stretched 2 hours. I'd sat alone in our living room, staring at Lake Michigan through floor-to-ceiling windows, wondering when my unemployment had become something to handle rather than something to support me through. Now 3 days later he was presenting me with a contract that reduced our 8-year marriage to line items and subclauses. What about Thursday? I asked. At Chez Laurent? When you said we were partners. Thursday's dinner had been his idea. A chance to strategize, he'd said. I'd worn the black dress he loved, the one that made me feel powerful even when my professional world was crumbling. He'd ordered a bottle of Krug without asking what I wanted, the first time in 8 years he hadn't asked my preference. Over the amuse-bouche, while other couples held hands across candlelit tables, Cole had launched into a presentation about restructuring our domestic arrangement for maximum efficiency. His business speak for destroying everything we'd built. We are partners, he said now, tapping the contract. Equal partners. That's what this ensures. I looked at my husband, really looked at him. His perfectly styled hair, his Tom Ford suit even though it was Saturday, his expression of mild impatience like I was a difficult client refusing to see reason. When had he become this person? Or had he always been this person and I'd just been too in love to notice? You know, I specialized in forensic accounting at Hartman, I said quietly. Something flickered across his face. Concern? Fear? But he recovered quickly. What does that have to do with anything? Just remembering my skill set, I said, picking up the pen. His pen. My gift to him when we still gave each other presents that meant something beyond their price tags. Since I'm about to be self-sufficient. I signed the contract with a flourish that would have made him proud, if he'd been paying attention to anything beyond his victory. Jade Pemberton in perfect cursive. The last time I'd ever signed that name. There, I said, sliding it back across the marble we'd chosen together in Italy on our honeymoon, giddy with love and possibility. Equal partners. Cole smiled, satisfied, already turning back to his phone. He didn't notice me taking photos of every page with my cell. He didn't notice me mentally cataloging every asset, every account, every carefully hidden financial transaction I'd pretended not to know about. He definitely didn't notice me texting my sister Emma. You were right. It's happening. Because while Cole thought he was restructuring our marriage, what he'd actually done was declare war. And he'd just handed me the blueprint for exactly how to win it. Emma's text came back immediately, finally showing his true colors. Document everything. My sister had never trusted Cole, not since the day she'd met him at our engagement party when he'd corrected her pronunciation of moat in front of everyone. I tucked my phone away and headed to bed, but sleep wasn't happening. My mind kept replaying the signature, the contract, the cold calculation in Cole's eyes. At 5 a.m. I gave up pretending and slipped out of bed. Cole's side was already empty, sheets barely disturbed. Through the closed door of his home office, I could hear his voice, smooth and confident, talking to Singapore about profit margins and market volatility. Saturday morning, and he was already 3 hours into his workday. I padded to the kitchen, needing caffeine to process what my life had become. Cole's laptop sat open on the counter. He must have been working there before his call. The screen was still lit and I wasn't proud of what I did next, but I wasn't ashamed either. The spreadsheet was titled, household reorganization postel. My unemployment had been reduced to initials. The Jade layoff. Like I was a line item in his quarterly reports. The columns were meticulous. Pre-JL monthly contribution showed my salary, our joint expenses, what percentage I'd covered. Post-JL sustainability model calculated exactly how much of a financial drain I'd become. He'd even created projections for different scenarios. If I found work in 3 months, 6 months, a year. The final column made my stomach turn. Optimal resolution timeline. He was calculating how long before he could justify leaving me. I took photos of every worksheet, every calculation, every cold assessment of my worth. Then I noticed another tab, MGM Consulting. The monthly transfers of $3,000 going back 6 months. Madison Grace Mitchell, his 28-year-old executive assistant. The woman who texted him about urgent presentations at 11 at night. The conference call droned on through the door. Cole laughed at something, that practiced chuckle he used with clients. I closed his laptop and went to work. By the time he left for golf at 9, his Saturday morning tradition with Marcus Fitzgerald and 2 other Princeton buddies, I'd transformed our dining room into Command Central. Office Max had opened at 8 and I'd been their first customer, loading up on laminating sheets, color-coded folders, and enough supplies to rival a law firm. Going to the club, Cole had said, grabbing his tit-laced bag. He'd paused at the door, watching me arrange my supplies. What's all this? Organizing, I'd replied, not looking up. Being self-sufficient. He'd laughed, actually laughed, and left. The moment his Tesla pulled out of the garage, I got serious. 8 years of marriage meant 8 years of financial documents, tax returns, investment statements, credit card bills. Cole thought he was clever with his hidden assets, but forensic accounting had been my specialty. Finding money was what I did. I created my own masterpiece, a 47-page document titled Marital Asset Utilization Framework. If Cole wanted to run our marriage like a business, I'd give him the full corporate treatment. Section 1. Historical Labor Analysis. Every dinner party I'd hosted for his clients. Every weekend I'd spent charming investors at tedious golf tournaments. Every thank you note I'd written, every gift I'd selected for his business associates. Every hour I'd spent making him look like a functional human being instead of the emotional void he actually was. Section 2. Intellectual Property Contributions. The investment strategies I'd suggested that he'd presented as his own. The connections from my Hartman network that had become his clients. The market insights I'd shared over breakfast that had mysteriously appeared in his presentations. Section 3. Opportunity Cost Analysis. The promotions I'd passed up to accommodate his career. The networking events I'd skipped to host his mother. The professional development I'd sacrificed to maintain his illusion of domestic perfection. By the time Cole's Tesla hummed back into the garage at 1, I'd bound everything in a leather portfolio that looked more expensive than it was. I heard him enter, the sound of his golf shoes on marble, the refrigerator opening. "Jade," he called. "Why is there a lock on your shelf?" I didn't answer. Let him wonder. He found me in the dining room, still in his golf attire. Those ridiculous plaid pants his Princeton friends convinced him looked good. His face was flushed from sun and probably a few beers at the 19th hole. "What is all this?" He gestured at my war room setup. "Your copy," I said, sliding the leather portfolio across the table with the same precision he'd used that morning. "Of our updated arrangement." He smirked, that patronizing expression I'd once found charming. "Jade, come on." Page 12, I interrupted. "Start with section 3.2. Still smiling, he opened the document. I watched his face change as he read. Retroactive compensation for unrecognized labor contributions, 2016 to 2024. "This is," he started. "Thorough," I supplied. "Keep reading." His smile died completely at the total, $347,000 in uncompensated labor, calculated at market rates for comparable services. Executive assistant, event planner, social coordinator, investment consultant. "You can't be serious," he said. Page 36. Precedent cases for retroactive compensation in dissolved business partnerships. His phone rang. Marcus Fitzgerald calling to thank him for covering the drinks. Cole's hand shook slightly as he answered, and I heard him say, "Mark, I need you to look at something. Legal opinion." Can I put you on speaker? Marcus's voice filled the room, still jovial from morning drinks. Sure, buddy. What's up? Jade created some kind of document about our household arrangement. Send it over, Marcus said, his voice shifting to professional mode. I watched Cole photograph pages, his jaw tightening with each image. We waited in silence for Marcus to review them, the only sound the tick of the grandfather clock Cole's mother had given us as a wedding present. Finally Marcus spoke, and he wasn't laughing anymore. Cole, is this real? She signed my agreement this morning, so she created this. No, I mean, are these numbers real? Did she really handle all this? Cole's silence was answer enough. Marcus whistled low. Legally, she's got you by the balls, buddy. You wanted a business arrangement, she gave you one. And honestly, based on what I'm seeing here, she's undervaluing her contributions. You're supposed to be my friend, Cole snapped. I am your friend, which is why I'm telling you the truth. Either tear up both agreements and go back to being married, or prepare to write a very large check. Cole hung up without saying goodbye. We stood there, facing each other across the table where we'd once shared romantic dinners, where we'd planned our future, where this morning he'd dismantled our marriage with a pen stroke. This is blackmail, he said finally. This is mathematics, I replied, echoing his words from that morning. Your idea just properly implemented. Cole stood there for another moment, his hand gripping the portfolio so tightly the leather creaked. Then he turned and walked out, leaving my document on the table like evidence at a crime scene. I heard his office door slam, the lock clicking into place. That night I barely slept. Not because of guilt, I was past that, but because I was planning. Cole thought he was the strategic one, the chess player, the one who saw 3 moves ahead. He didn't realize I'd been watching him play for 8 years, learning every gambit, every tell, every weakness. At 3 a.m. I crept to the living room with my laptop. Our smart home system was Cole's pride and joy, a $50,000 investment in automated everything. The future of living, he'd called it, spending weeks programming routines and zones. Now it would be the battlefield. The master control app was still logged into my phone. Cole had never thought to revoke my administrative access. Why would he? I'd never shown interest in his technical toys before. It took me 3 hours and several YouTube tutorials, but by dawn I'd reprogrammed everything. Jade's Zone and Cole's Zone were born. My zones ran on new passwords, biometric locks that only recognized my face and fingerprints. His zones kept his original access, but with some creative restrictions I'd built in. The beauty was in the overlap areas, the spaces we supposedly shared equally. Those would require both our authorizations to function. I was back in bed, feigning sleep, when Cole's alarm went off at 6 a.m. I heard him pad to the bathroom, yawning. Then silence. Then a muttered curse. The shower wouldn't start. His zone, his problem. Jade, he called. Something's wrong with the shower. I stretched lazily. Mine works fine. Try resetting your access code. More cursing. The sound of him jabbing at the control panel. Finally, the shower started, but only cold water. I'd restricted his hot water heater access to economy mode between 6 and 7 a.m. Energy efficiency after all. By the time he made it to the kitchen, still shivering, I was already there with my coffee, reading news on my tablet. The coffee maker won't connect, he said, staring at the machine like it had betrayed him. That's in my zone now, I explained. Would you like to purchase a cup? I'm offering a special rate, only $8 for premium brew. His face went red. This is ridiculous. This is the 50-50 arrangement you wanted. Equal division of assets. I took a long, satisfied sip of my coffee. Your coffee maker is in your office. He stormed to his office, and I heard the cheap Mr. Coffee machine I'd bought him gurgling to life. $20 at Target. It seemed appropriate. Saturday arrived with Emma's visit. My sister had driven down from Milwaukee in her 10-year-old Honda, parking it next to Cole's Tesla in our garage. The contrast was perfect. Everything about our situation summarized in 2 vehicles. Holy, Emma stopped mid-word as she entered our penthouse. The living room was bathed in 2 distinct lighting schemes. My side glowed with warm amber tones from the smart bulbs. Cole's side was lit in cold, corporate blue. A clear line divided the space where our zones met. Jade, what have you done? Implemented Cole's vision, I said, hugging her. Come on, let me show you my side. Emma followed me through the apartment, her teacher's salary sensibilities visibly offended by every surface. When we reached the kitchen, she saw the digital locks on the refrigerator sections. "You're joking," she said. "He ate my meal prep at 2 a.m. Wednesday night. $60 worth of organic ingredients, gone." I showed her the security footage on my phone. Cole in his boxers illuminated by refrigerator light, eating my carefully portioned containers. "This isn't healthy," Emma whispered, but then I showed her my bank statements. The joint account Cole had drained to protect assets. My severance that had mysteriously needed to cover unexpected household expenses. The credit card he'd canceled without warning. "Oh, honey," she said, understanding dawning. "He's trying to force you out." "He's trying to break me," I corrected. But he forgot I learned from the best. Sunday morning, I decided to document Cole's self-sufficiency journey. He'd announced he was going grocery shopping, a first in our 8-year marriage. I waited 10 minutes, then followed. Whole Foods on a Sunday was packed, perfect cover. I kept my distance, phone discreetly recording as Cole wandered the produce section like a lost tourist in a foreign country. He stood in front of the cherry display for 5 full minutes, holding a small box marked $27. "Excuse me," he asked a teenage employee stocking apples. "Is this the normal price for cherries?" The kid looked at the box, then at Cole and his $1,000 sneakers. "It's organic, sir. And imported." "But $27? You could try regular cherries," the employee suggested. "They're $8. Cole put the expensive box in his cart anyway, image over economics even now. The meat counter was worse. He ordered 8 pounds of Wagyu beef, not understanding the price was per pound, not total. The butcher's eyebrows rose, but he wrapped it anyway. Cole added truffle salt, $45, aged balsamic, $62, and something called heritage grains, $30, that I guarantee he couldn't define. His total came to $438.67. For one person. For 1 week. I was already home when he returned, struggling with his bags. "Need help?" I offered sweetly. "I've got it," he grunted, dragging premium groceries to his side of the kitchen. Everything went into his designated areas, including the freezer section I'd marked with digital tape. Monday morning was beautiful. Cole had an 8 a.m. breakfast meeting with Japanese investors, crucial for his fund's expansion. He woke at 6, showered, still cold, and went to make breakfast. I watched from my laptop camera as he opened his refrigerator section. The Wagyu was there, raw and expensive. The heritage grains sat unopened. The truffle salt looked decorative on his shelf. He tried every password combination on my locked section, where my prepped breakfast sandwiches waited. Jade 1234. Anniversary 2016. Even I love you, which made me laugh bitterly. Finally, at 7:47 a.m. he placed an order for delivery. $85 for eggs, toast and coffee, delivered at 8:23 a.m. His investors had already been waiting 23 minutes. That evening I found him eating cereal for dinner. The Wagyu had gone bad. He didn't know it needed to be used within 2 days of purchase. $400 of groceries, I said, and you're eating cornflakes. He looked up at me and for a moment I saw something crack in his facade. Not enough to matter, but enough to know the war was working. He set down his spoon, the cornflakes going soggy in the milk. For a second neither of us spoke. Then he pushed back from the table and walked to his office without a word, leaving his bowl right there on the counter. His side of the counter technically, but still, old habits die hard. I cleaned up his mess anyway because seeing dirty dishes bothered me more than making a point. That's when I noticed his credit card statement on the counter, partially hidden under his abandoned Wall Street journal. He'd been reviewing expenses, probably trying to figure out where all his money was going now that he was buying $40 honey and truffle salt he couldn't pronounce. One line item caught my eye. MGM Consulting, $3,000. The same charge appeared every month going back 6 months. $3,000 monthly to a consulting firm I'd never heard of, while he'd been telling me we needed to tighten our belts due to market volatility. I photographed the statement and went to my laptop. The address for MGM Consulting wasn't a business complex or corporate building. It was the Meridian, a luxury apartment building downtown where studios started at $4,000 a month. My forensic accounting instincts kicked in hard. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about truth. I pulled up corporation records, business registrations, tax filings. MGM Consulting LLC had been registered 7 months ago. The managing member? Madison Grace Mitchell. Madison. His executive assistant. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, legs for days, and a habit of texting Cole about urgent matters at inappropriate hours. I dug deeper. The LLC had a website. If you could call 3 blog posts about manifesting your best life through strategic thinking, a website. The last post was 4 months old. Some consulting firm. That's when everything clicked. The late nights at the office. The weekend emergency meetings. The way he'd suddenly become protective of his phone, keeping it face down during dinner, taking it into the bathroom during showers. I was building a new spreadsheet, suspicious financial activity, when the universe decided to hand me a gift. It was Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. according to my laptop clock. Cole was in the shower, his phone charging on his nightstand. The water was running full blast. He'd figured out how to override my hot water restrictions by showering at night. His phone lit up. A text notification. I shouldn't have looked. But then again, he shouldn't have been funding his assistant's apartment while making me document every cent I spent on groceries. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. From Madison Mitchell. The water was still running. I grabbed my phone and photographed his screen, making sure the timestamp was visible. Then I opened my evidence folder. Yes, I had an evidence folder now, and filed it under Exhibit A, Emotional Assets Misappropriation. The shower stopped. I quickly returned to my side of the bed, pretending to read on my Kindle. Cole came out in his Turkish cotton robe, the one I'd bought him for Christmas last year, when I still believed we had a marriage worth saving. Who texted? I asked casually. He glanced at his phone and I watched his face change. Just a flash of panic before the mask slipped back on. Work thing. Singapore markets. Singapore markets. At midnight. Sending heart emojis. Busy day tomorrow? I asked, turning a page I hadn't read. The usual. Some meetings. He climbed into bed, careful to stay on his side of the invisible line we'd drawn down the middle. Why? Just wondering. He was asleep within minutes, snoring softly. I lay there in the dark, planning my next moves. Madison wanted to see him tomorrow. Fine. Maybe I'd do some seeing of my own. Wednesday morning, Cole left early, mumbling something about breakfast with clients. I waited until his Tesla disappeared into traffic, then called in a favor from Janet, my former colleague at Hartman who now worked in the same building as Cole's firm. I need to borrow your visitor pass, I said. Jade, what are you planning? Research. She sighed. Second floor cafe. 20 minutes. The building's lobby was all marble and glass, trying so hard to scream success that it felt desperate. Janet met me at the cafe, sliding her visitor pass across the table. 15th floor is Cole's firm, she said. But you didn't get this from me. Get what? I smiled, pocketing the pass. I didn't go to the 15th floor. I went to the parking garage and waited. Cole's Tesla had a reserved spot, P47, right next to P48, which belonged to a familiar white BMW with vanity plates. Emmeline 28. Madison. 28. Settle. At 12:15 they emerged from the elevator together. Cole's hand on her lower back, guiding her toward her car. The kind of casual intimacy that comes from practice. They were laughing about something, her head tilted back, his face more animated than I'd seen in months. I took photos. Then I followed them. They went to Brevard, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. The kind of place Cole used to take clients he was trying to impress. Now apparently it was where he took his assistant for meetings. I was sitting in my car reviewing the photos when someone tapped on my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Victoria Pemberton stood there in her St. John's suit and pearls, looking like old money and new judgment combined. Cole's mother. My mother-in-law. The woman who'd never quite approved of me but had been too polite to say so directly. I rolled down the window. Following my son? She asked, but there was no accusation in her voice. Just curiosity. Victoria, I can explain. No need. She opened my passenger door and slid in, bringing with her a cloud of Chanel No. 5. I was at Brevard myself. Library Foundation lunch. Imagine my surprise seeing Cole with his assistant. We sat in silence for a moment. I know about Madison, dear, Victoria said finally. Have known for months. My stomach dropped. Why didn't you tell you? She turned to look at me directly. Because Cole's father had his own Madison once. Her name was Jennifer. 26, marketing coordinator, thought she was in love. Victoria's smile was sharp as winter. I handled it differently than you're handling this. What did you do? I stayed quiet. Played the perfect wife. Let him have his fun. She adjusted her pearl necklace. Then Jennifer got pregnant. William paid her to disappear, but the damage was done. The board found out. His reputation never recovered. I'm sorry, Victoria. Don't be. I got everything in the end. The houses, the investments, the company shares. She studied me with new interest. But your way, all this documentation, the contracts, the digital warfare Emma told me about. Emma talked to you? She called yesterday. Worried about you. But I told her not to be. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it reached her eyes. Your way might be more effective. Certainly more interesting. She opened her purse and pulled out a flash drive. What's this? Security footage from the Pemberton building. 6 months worth. Amazing how often Madison had to work late. How often Cole had to supervise. He pressed it into my hand. Call it a wedding gift. 8 years delayed. I stared at the flash drive in my hand, this small piece of plastic that felt heavier than my wedding ring ever had. Victoria was still watching me, her expression unreadable behind those perfectly applied cosmetics that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because, she said, checking her Cartier watch, Cole is making the same mistakes his father made, but with less style and even less discretion. At least William had the sense to be subtle. She opened her door, then paused. I'm coming for tea tomorrow. Have Earl Grey ready. She left me sitting there, holding evidence I hadn't even asked for, from a woman who'd spent 8 years making me feel like an interloper in her son's life. Thursday afternoon, Victoria arrived precisely at 2, wearing a different St. John's suit but the same expression of mild disappointment she'd perfected over decades of charity boards and country club politics. Cole was at the office, or wherever he actually spent his afternoons now. Earl Grey? I asked, already knowing the answer. Please. I went to the kitchen and returned with my laminated price list, the one I'd created after Cole's 50-50 declaration. That'll be $12. Includes preparation, service, and cleanup. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. She opened her Hermes wallet, not the everyday one but the special occasion piece that probably cost more than my car, and counted out exactly $12 in singles. Her manicured fingers trembled slightly, not with rage as I'd expected, but with what looked like suppressed laughter. $12, she said, placing the bills on the coffee table. For tea. Cole's policy. I'm just following the rules he established. Indeed. She maintained eye contact with an intensity that could freeze champagne. Make the tea, dear. We need to talk. When I returned with the Earl Grey, properly steeped china cup, the whole ceremony she'd trained me in, Victoria had spread documents across my coffee table. Old documents, yellowed at the edges, some handwritten in fountain pen. 1987, she said, lifting a credit card statement. William started his own restructuring of our marriage. Said I'd become too dependent, too comfortable. Sound familiar? I sat down, careful not to disturb the papers. The statement showed charges to hotels, restaurants, jewelry stores. None of them for Victoria. Jennifer, Victoria continued, was 26. Marketing coordinator at his firm. Blonde, ambitious, thought she was special. She sipped her $12 tea. They always think they're special. How did you find out? Credit card statements first. Then private investigator. This was before cell phones, dear. Following people required actual skill. She pulled out a manila folder, thick with photographs and reports. Cost me $5,000 but worth every penny. The photos were grainy but clear enough. William Pemberton, looking exactly like an older version of Cole, with a young woman who could have been Madison's older sister. What did you do? I asked. Nothing at first. I let him think he was clever. Let him make mistakes. And he did, so many mistakes. She smiled, sharp as winter moonlight. Then I started moving money. Moving money? William thought he controlled our finances. He was the businessman after all. But I'd been managing my father's estate since I was 21. I knew more about offshore accounts and asset protection than William ever bothered to learn. She pulled out another document. By the time he asked for a divorce, I'd already moved 70% of our liquid assets into trusts he didn't know existed. That's brilliant, vindictive, necessary. Victoria shrugged. It was survival. But you're doing something different. Something smarter. She pulled out a thick legal document, pages tagged with colored tabs. This is William's prenuptial agreement template. The one Cole used for yours with modifications. I took the document, scanning through familiar language until she pointed to a specific section. Section 17B. William insisted on this, financial deception affecting marital assets. He thought it would protect him if I ever hid money. Her laugh was bitter. Instead, it became his downfall. Jennifer got pregnant. He paid her to disappear. That payment constituted financial deception affecting marital assets. And Cole kept this clause? Modified it, expanded it, made it even more comprehensive. Victoria turned to the marked page. Any undisclosed financial transaction over $5,000 that affects marital assets or stability can trigger immediate forfeiture of claims. $30,000 to Madison over 6 months. All documented. Victoria, this is your ammunition. Use it wisely. She stood, gathering specific documents while leaving others. Keep these. The originals are in my safe deposit box if you need them for court. Why are you really doing this? He paused at the door. Because I spent 30 years pretending my marriage was perfect while William humiliated me with younger women. You're not pretending. You're fighting. And frankly, she smiled again, that sharp winter smile, it's about time someone in this family fought back properly. After she left, I went to Cole's home gym. His sacred space where he pretended to work out while actually taking conference calls. Victoria's words echoed, check everywhere. His gym bag sat in the corner, the expensive leather one I'd given him last birthday. I emptied it methodically. Protein powder, earbuds, spare clothes, and there, tucked in an inside pocket, a small digital recorder. My hands shook as I played it back. Cole's voice, clear and confident. She's been unstable since the layoff. Crying constantly, not sleeping, making these bizarre accusations about affairs. Then Madison, we need to be careful. If she finds out about the payments. She won't. She's too emotional to think clearly. Classic depression. My lawyer says if we can document mental instability, the prenup becomes irrelevant. How long before you can file? Few more weeks. Let her keep playing with her spreadsheets and locks. The more erratic she acts, the better for us. Madison laughed, tinkling and false. Poor thing. She really has no idea. None, Cole agreed. By the time she figures it out, I'll have everything lined up. Clean break, minimal settlement, and we can finally stop hiding. The recording continued for another 40 minutes. Plans within plans, lies within lies. They'd been strategizing my breakdown while I'd been fighting for my marriage. I sat on his workout bench, recorder in hand, feeling something shift inside me. Not breaking, hardening. Like coal under pressure becoming diamond. I copied the files to 3 different drives, uploaded them to the cloud and emailed them to my lawyer. The one I'd hired yesterday, Patricia Nakamura, who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and had a reputation for destroying prenups. Then I put the recorder back exactly where I'd found it. Let Cole think I was still in the dark, still playing with spreadsheets while he planned my demolition. The recorder went back in Cole's gym bag, nestled between his protein powder and spare socks. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. That evening, I called Patricia Nakamura from my car, parked outside a Starbucks where the Wi-Fi was free and Cole couldn't monitor my calls. I need to see you tomorrow, I said. Can you recommend a forensic accountant? I work with someone, Patricia replied, her voice professional but warm. Keiko Tanaka. She's expensive, but she finds everything. How expensive? 5,000 retainer. Each. $10,000. My entire severance package minus what I'd already spent on groceries and gas. Cole thought I was using it for the therapy he'd been suggesting. You seem stressed, Jade. Maybe you should talk to someone about your adjustment issues. Book them both, I said. Tomorrow if possible. The law offices of Winters and Associates occupied a corner suite in a building that screamed old money and older secrets. Rachel Winters herself met me in the lobby, 60-something, silver hair in a power bob, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Patricia says you have an interesting case," she said, leading me to a conference room where Patricia Nakamura waited with another woman, Keiko Tanaka, I assumed. I spread everything on the table. The contracts, the flash drive from Victoria, the recordings, the financial documents, my own detailed spreadsheets tracking 8 years of uncompensated labor. Rachel whistled low. He actually signed this 50-50 agreement? His idea. Had his lawyer draft it. And these recordings? Found them yesterday. He's been planning to claim I'm mentally unstable. Keiko was already deep in the financial statements, her fingers flying across her calculator. These MGM consulting payments, they're just the beginning. Look here. She pointed to a series of transfers. He's been moving money for 2 years. Cayman accounts, Swiss-numbered accounts. Not illegal, but definitely violates any reasonable interpretation of financial transparency in a marriage. Can you trace it all? Give me a week, Keiko said. Maybe less. Patricia pulled up Cole's firm website on her laptop. Pemberton Capital. His father's company. Cole's a senior partner now, I said. And Madison Mitchell is listed as executive strategic consultant, Patricia noted. Interesting title for someone with 3 blog posts about manifestation. Rachel leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile spreading across her face. The prenup has a financial deception clause. Section 17B. Any undisclosed financial transaction over $5,000 that affects marital assets triggers forfeiture. $30,000 to Madison so far, I said. Plus whatever Keiko finds in those offshore accounts. Rachel's smile widened. Your husband just handed us a gift. We spent 3 hours building the strategy. Keiko would trace every penny. Patricia would document the pattern of deception. Rachel would prepare the filing that would destroy Cole's carefully constructed exit plan. One more thing, Rachel said as we finished. Document everything from now on. Every conversation, every transaction, every time he breathes wrong. And Jade? Be careful. Cornered animals get dangerous. Saturday morning, Cole left for Boston. A weekend conference he claimed, though I'd seen the hotel confirmation email on his phone. The Ritz-Carlton, 2 rooms booked. MGM Consulting must need extensive strategic consultation. An hour after his Tesla disappeared, the doorbell rang. Madison Mitchell stood in my hallway, all 5'9" of her, wearing designer jeans and confidence-like armor. I need to get some work files from Cole's office, she said, already stepping forward like she owned the place. He's in Boston, I said, not moving from the doorway. I know. He gave me permission to. No. She blinked, clearly not used to being refused. Excuse me. No, you can't come in. If Cole wants to give you files, he can do it himself. At the office. During business hours. Her perfectly glossed lips tightened. You don't understand. These are important documents for Monday's meeting. Then Cole should have remembered them. I started to close the door. She put her hand against it, forcing it open. Look, I don't think you understand the situation here. I pulled out my phone, already recording. Explain it to me. Maybe it was my calm tone, or maybe she was just that confident, but Madison stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that my phone still caught perfectly. Cole promised me this place would be mine soon. So maybe you should start packing now, save yourself the embarrassment later. How soon? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Few weeks, maybe less. Depends how quickly his lawyer can prove you're unfit. She smiled, all teeth and no warmth. The crying, the paranoid behavior with the locks and contracts. It's all documented. Mental instability due to job loss. Classic case. Is that what Cole told you? It's what everyone can see. She stepped back, satisfied with her threat. I'll tell Cole you were uncooperative. Again. I let her get to the elevator before calling out. Madison. She turned, one eyebrow raised. Check your email. I sent the cease and desist letter Rachel had prepared while Madison was still in the elevator. Legal notice to stop harassment, stop attempting unauthorized entry to my residence, and stop interfering with my marriage. Copy to Cole's firm's HR department. Copy to their legal team. My phone buzzed immediately. Cole from Boston. What did you just do? I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded Keiko's preliminary findings to Patricia. Cole had been billing Pemberton Capital for Madison's consulting fees while she provided no actual services. The invoices were fake, the work non-existent. Not enough for criminal charges. Cole was too smart for that. But enough to trigger an internal investigation. Sunday evening, while Cole was still in Boston, I compiled everything into a single encrypted folder. Financial records showing 2 years of hidden transfers. Recording of him planning to claim mental instability. Madison's confession about taking the apartment. Victoria's evidence of the pattern. Father and son, same playbook, 30 years apart. The investigation had revealed one final detail that even surprised Keiko. Cole had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me 6 months ago. I was unemployed, supposedly unstable, and worth more dead than divorced. Rachel called that evening. We file tomorrow. Be ready. I sat in my divided living room, my warm lights glowing against his cold blue ones, and thought about the woman I'd been 8 years ago. The one who'd signed that prenup thinking it would never matter because our love was real. The one who'd made his coffee every morning because taking care of him felt like love. That woman was gone. In her place sat someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who'd learned that when your husband treats marriage like a hostile takeover, you better be ready to fight like a corporate raider. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m. Monday morning. Rachel's text, filed. Game on. I didn't sleep after that. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table watching the sunrise paint Lake Michigan gold while reviewing my notes for tonight. The quarterly partners' dinner at Pemberton Capital. The one event where spouses were not just invited but expected. Cole had forgotten to remove me from the guest list. By the time Cole stumbled into the kitchen at 7, I was already dressed. Not for war but for victory. The black Valentino dress I'd bought myself after my last promotion at Hartman, the one Cole said made me look too powerful for social events. Coffee's not working again, he muttered, jabbing at his machine. Try reading the manual, I suggested, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. I hear self-sufficiency builds character. He glared at me, then noticed the dress. Where are you going? Work meeting, I lied smoothly. Potential consulting opportunity. He grunted, still fighting with the coffee maker. That's when the doorbell rang. I'll get it, I said, but Cole was already at the door, probably expecting Madison with his morning files. Instead, a process server stood there looking bored and official. Cole Pemberton? Yes. You've been served. The man handed Cole a thick envelope and walked away without another word. Cole tore it open right there in the doorway, still in his robe, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally rage. You're divorcing me? He held up the papers like evidence of my betrayal. You wanted a business dissolution, I said, adjusting my earrings. I'm giving you one. He flipped through the pages, his face getting paler with each section. $347,000? You're insane. That's just the retroactive compensation. Wait till you see the penalties for financial deception. Page 47 if you're curious. His hands actually shook as he found the page detailing the MGM consulting payments, the offshore accounts, the life insurance policy he'd taken out on me. How did you? Forensic accounting was my specialty, remember? Or did you forget everything about my career the moment I lost my job? His phone started ringing, then pinging, then buzzing with the intensity of a swarm of angry bees. Word was already spreading. That evening, I arrived at the Palmer House's grand ballroom 20 minutes after cocktails started. The Pemberton Capital quarterly dinner was in full swing. 50 partners and their spouses pretending to enjoy each other's company while calculating each other's net worth. I found Richard Pemberton, the managing partner and Cole's cousin, standing near the bar with his wife. Richard had inherited his father's position and his grandfather's nose for scandal. Jade, he said, clearly surprised. We didn't think you'd. Wouldn't miss it, I said, pulling an envelope from my clutch. Actually, Richard, could we speak privately? It's about Cole. His wife excused herself immediately, the kind of woman who knew when to disappear. Richard led me to a corner, his expression already wary. This is about the divorce papers, he said. This is about embezzlement, I corrected, handing him the envelope. MGM Consulting. $3,000 monthly for 6 months. Fake invoices, no services rendered. The consultant in question is better known for other services she provides to Cole. Richard opened the envelope, his face hardening as he read Keiko's forensic analysis. The fake invoices, the evidence that Madison had never provided any actual consulting work. This could destroy the firm's reputation, he said quietly. Only if it becomes public, I agreed. Which depends entirely on how the partners handle it. Across the room, Cole had just arrived with Madison on his arm. Bold move, bringing his mistress to a partner's dinner while still technically married. Several wives noticed immediately, their whispers spreading like wildfire. Richard looked from the papers to Cole to me. What are you asking for? Nothing from the firm. This is between you and your partner. I just thought you should know where company funds were going. I walked away, leaving Richard holding evidence that would trigger an emergency partners meeting within hours. But first I had one more performance to give. Cole found me at the dessert table, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. Madison hung back, suddenly less confident in a room full of wives who knew exactly what she was. You're destroying everything, he hissed. I'm documenting everything, I corrected, loud enough for nearby partners to hear. There's a difference. This is my father's firm. Victoria's voice cut through the air like ice. She stood in the doorway, magnificent in Chanel, flanked by a man in a suit that screamed legal counsel. It was your father's firm. Before you dishonored his memory with your sloppy affair and sloppier embezzlement. The room went silent. Madison actually stepped behind Cole like he could shield her from Victoria's Arctic presence. Mother, Cole started. I'm here in my capacity as trustee of the Pemberton Family Trust, Victoria continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. To inform you that effective immediately, you're removed from the board for conduct unbecoming a Pemberton. You can't. I can. I am. I have. He turned to Richard. I believe you have an announcement as well? Richard cleared his throat. The partners will be meeting tomorrow to discuss Cole's position at the firm. Until then, he's suspended pending investigation of financial irregularities. Cole's phone exploded with notifications. Email after email from colleagues, clients, connections, all distancing themselves from his radioactive reputation. He stood there in his designer suit, holding his dying career in his hand while his mistress edged toward the exit. Your father would be appalled, Victoria said, and her voice carried a lifetime of disappointment. Not at the affair, God knows William had plenty, but at how poorly you executed it. Fake invoices? Really? At least your father's mistresses could type. Madison fled. Actually ran from the ballroom in her designer heels, leaving Cole standing alone in a room full of people who'd known him since childhood, all of them now seeing him for exactly what he was. I picked up my clutch and walked past him, pausing just long enough to whisper, check your email. The message from my lawyer was simple. Settlement conference scheduled for Thursday. Bring your checkbook. The managing partner's email to all partners arrived while I was in the elevator. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Mandatory attendance. By the time I reached the lobby, Cole's career at his father's firm was over. 8 years of marriage destroyed by his own greed. A lifetime of reputation demolished by his own deception. The elevator doors closed on my old life, and I walked out of the Palmer House into the Chicago night feeling something I hadn't felt in months, free. My phone vibrated with messages from people who'd witnessed Cole's public demolition, but I didn't read them. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight I just wanted to breathe. Thursday's settlement conference took place in a mediator's office that looked like it was designed to drain the fight out of people. Beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. Cole sat across from me with his new lawyer, some overworked public defender type who probably charged by the hour what Cole used to spend on lunch. My client is prepared to offer, the lawyer began. My client's terms are non-negotiable, Rachel interrupted, sliding our demand across the table. The penthouse, half of all assets including offshore accounts, and $347,000 in retroactive compensation. Cole's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, probably explaining that a public trial would expose the embezzlement, the affair, the life insurance policy, everything. This is extortion, Cole said, his voice hoarse. He'd lost weight, his suit hanging loose on his frame. This is mathematics, I said, using his favorite phrase one last time. Sign it or we go to trial. He stared at me across the table, and for a moment I saw the man I'd married. Brilliant, confident, convinced the world was his to conquer. Then that man crumbled and he picked up the pen with a trembling hand. His signature was shaky, nothing like the bold strokes he'd used on our marriage contract. As he signed away the penthouse, the assets, the life he'd built on his father's money and my invisible labor, I felt nothing. No triumph, no sadness, just a hollow recognition that 8 years had come down to this. Signatures on paper just like they'd begun. 3 months passed in a blur of boxes and paperwork. I kept the penthouse but redecorated, removing every trace of Cole's cold minimalism. Emma helped, bringing warmth with second-hand furniture that had actual character, plants that made the space feel alive, artwork from local artists instead of investment pieces. One morning, Emma texted me a screenshot from Madison's Instagram. I was drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's okayest ex-wife." Emma's housewarming gift, when I read Madison's post. Dating in Chicago is impossible. This guy actually invoiced me for half our dinner date. He calculated tax and tip down to the penny. Then charged me for his gas to pick me up. Why are men so cheap? Hashtag dating nightmare, hashtag Chicago men, hashtag splitting bills is not romantic. I laughed until my sides hurt, then screenshotted it from my karma folder. Madison had found her equal. Someone who treated relationships like transactions. The comments were even better, full of women sharing similar stories, missing the irony completely. That screenshot became the inspiration for my next chapter. I'd been surviving on the settlement money, but surviving wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to build something. Equal Means Everything launched 6 weeks later. Not a law firm, but a consulting service helping women recognize and document financial abuse in marriages. My website went live on a Tuesday. By Thursday I had 17 inquiries. My first real client came through Victoria, of all people. Senator Catherine Walsh, whose husband controlled every penny while she ran his campaigns, raised his children and smiled for his photo ops. She sat in my home office, formerly Cole's gym, crying into tissues while showing me 20 years of financial manipulation. He says it's for tax purposes, she explained, but I can't even buy groceries without his approval. Let me show you something, I said, pulling up my own documentation. This was my marriage. This is how I proved it. This is how you build your case. Catherine became my success story. Within 4 months she had her own accounts, her own credit cards, and a post-nuptial agreement that would make Cole's prenup look like a kindergarten contract. Word spread through Victoria's country club network faster than gossip at a junior league luncheon. 6 months after the divorce, Victoria invited me to her annual charity gala, the Pemberton Foundation's fundraiser for women's financial literacy. Ironic, considering the Pemberton men's history with financial deception. I wore red, bold, unapologetic red, and arrived alone. The ballroom was full of familiar faces, people who'd watched my marriage implode, who'd whispered about the scandal, who'd chosen sides. "Jade," Victoria called out, and for the first time her voice held genuine warmth. "Come, I want you to meet someone." She introduced me to 3 women, all going through similar situations, all needing help. By the time dinner was served, I had 5 new clients. That's when I saw him. Cole standing by the bar looking like a ghost of his former self. Thinner, older, wearing a suit that had seen better days. He was working at Morrison & Associates now, a small firm that handled personal injury cases. Madison was nowhere to be seen. He approached slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal. "Jade. Cole. You look." He paused, searching for words. "Happy." "I am." He stared at his drink, swirling the ice. "I understand now. What I did. How I treated you. I understand. I could have been cruel. Could have twisted the knife, reminded him of every humiliation, every betrayal. Instead I said simply, understanding and experiencing are different educations." He nodded, started to walk away, then turned back. "The firm you started. Equal Means Everything. It's good work." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." Victoria appeared at my elbow as Cole disappeared into the crowd. "They're about to announce the Community Impact Award," she said, guiding me toward the stage. "The Pemberton Foundation is proud to present this year's Community Impact Award to Jade Matthews," the announcer said, using my maiden name that I'd reclaimed, for her work with Equal Means Everything, providing pro bono financial abuse consulting to women in need. I stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces. Some friendly, some curious, some calculating their own marriage's values. Victoria stood in the front row, and when she smiled at me, she mouthed a single word, daughter. Financial abuse doesn't always look like control, I said into the microphone. Sometimes it looks like equality. Sometimes it's disguised as fairness. Sometimes it comes with a spreadsheet and a laminated contract. But abuse is abuse, whether it's calculated in dollars or delivered in bruises. The room was silent. Equal means everything, I continued. Not equal division but equal worth. Equal respect. Equal partnership. That's what we help women find, not just their financial freedom, but their understanding that they deserve both love and respect, not one or the other. The applause was genuine, warm, real. As I walked back to my table, award in hand, I caught a glimpse of myself in the ballroom mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the one who'd signed that contract with Cole's expensive pen. She wasn't the one who'd made his coffee every morning for 8 years. She was someone entirely new. Someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't destroying someone else. It's building something better from the ashes they left behind. My phone buzzed. Another inquiry through my website. Another woman needing help. Another chance to turn someone's 50-50 nightmare into a new beginning. I smiled, thinking about Cole in his small apartment, probably eating takeout from containers, finally experiencing the self-sufficiency he'd preached. Me. I was experiencing something better. Freedom. If this story of calculated revenge had you glued to your screen, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Jade charged Victoria $12 for tea service, watching Cole's mother count out exact change with trembling fingers. What was your favorite moment of sweet revenge? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more captivating stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.